The Midnight Sky, out on Netflix, new film directed by George Clooney, starring himself, Felicity Jones, and Kyle Chandler. It's a slow burning science fiction film resembling, in some ways, in many ways, Interstellar, with the way it tries to merge the space related plot with a central father daughter relationship. Clooney plays Dr. Lofthouse, and when we meet him, he is the last remaining scientist on an Arctic station. All the other people, as we learn, have left because just 3 weeks ago something catastrophic happened, which impacted the entire planet, and they basically evacuated, ran for their lives. He stayed behind, partly because he's sick with cancer and doesn't really have anything else to live for, but also partly because, as we learn, there is an active space mission out there that went to another planet that he discovered to verify if a colony could be set up there. That spaceship is now returning to Earth, and he's trying to establish contact to warn them away, to tell them, hey, this planet, we fucked up. This planet is no longer habitable. You have to get away. You have to go back. So he's trying to save their lives from getting into the middle of this huge cataclysm. And he's got a personal reason to do so, because he clearly has a connection to one of the astronauts. And it's not spoken out right away, but we can figure this out in about 10 minutes that it's his daughter. But also, things get further complicated because Lofthouse discovers a child also living on the station, a girl who was apparently left behind when the people were evacuated. So he now has to not only ensure the safety of the astronauts, but also take care of the child. And the story has three strands, really. One is Lofthouse doing his thing to establish communication and developing a relationship with the girl. Second, the tiniest one, are the flashbacks to his earlier life, where we learn, about his youth, and we learn he was not a good father. In fact, he never really acknowledged his daughter as his own. And finally, third, we have the astronauts who are on their way to Earth and encounter their own bunch of problems. Now, the biggest problem of the film is that these plot threads don't really mesh with one another all that well. There were times when we spent so much time on the spaceship that I forgot all about Clooney back on Earth, and I think that really takes away from what could have been, what should have been, the emotional core of the film. The relationship between the man and the young girl. It's clear that this was, shaping up to be sort of a redemption arc for him, an opportunity to try again, to take care of a child, do it right this time. But unfortunately, that is largely just pushed to the background by the astronaut plot. And boy, is this one weak. If you've ever seen any film about interstellar travel, there is exactly nothing that will surprise you here. The character archetypes, the problems they encounter, the way they attempt to fix them, the bad stuff that ends up happening. Hell, even the ship design is very, very similar to what we've already seen in Sunshine, for example. There's also an entire sequence which is almost straight up lifted from Gravity, which Clooney was partly inspired by, as he himself admits, and makes even less sense in the context of this film than it did there. There's also an issue for me that the movie pretends to be a serious science fiction movie with focus on scientific accuracy, but pretty much all of the stuff that happens to the astronauts is just completely nonsensical, on top of being very cliched story beats. I also have to say the CGI and especially the green screens in several of the scenes look pretty shaky and made me immediately check out and just remember that I'm actually in my living room just watching a movie and not being in space with these people. So it completely breaks immersion. Crucially, the movie also fails at creating emotional anchors in its characters. I'll go back to the Interstellar comparison, okay? That movie worked because we understood the father-daughter relationship very well. And even when these two were apart, each on their own, each having their own sort of adventures, we believed both characters and could get on board with their motivations and actions. In The Midnight Sky, that simply doesn't happen. Despite the jumps between Clooney and the astronauts, there was never a moment when I would care about anything going on. I was totally indifferent all the way through, and perhaps even worse, I was bored. And mind you, I love sci fi, and especially the cerebral kind of sci fi, the introspective stories using science fiction scenarios as a jump point to philosophical journeys. The Midnight Sky attempts to do that unsuccessfully. It also has an ending that feels a little bit hopeful, but then you think about it for 5 seconds and it's actually extremely depressing, which doesn't line up with the tone of the scene at all. And also, speaking about the tone, I want to highlight the music. Usually, film scores are either very good, you notice them because the music is jumping to the foreground. It's very very good, or they're unnoticeable. It's just there. But this one was distractingly bad. I thought most of the music was it sounded extremely generic and lazy, with the only exception being the scene of the final conversation between Clooney and the spaceship. That one has actually a nice piece playing over it, and also Clooney himself finally does some interesting acting. And there is one shot which is quite beautiful, and in general, it's the only positive that I can remember about the film. Well, one of two. The other one is Clooney's beard, which is properly bushy and just very impressive. That's it, I'm afraid. Good beard, decent scene towards the end. The rest of the film is a boring, unengaging mess.